All right. Well, then I'll go ahead and get started. Also, my name is Londie Martin. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Rhetoric and Writing. And I've chaired lots of portfolio committees and served on lots of committees where I wasn't the chair. It's a process I enjoy. I enjoy working with students as they get to look through all of their work. And I find that it's often, at least in our department, and just to be clear, there are 4 of you or 3 of you here. What programs are y'all in? If you want to just type it in the chat, you can, because I don't want to assume, that everyone's here is from the same kinds of programs. But so that's important for me to say just at the beginning. I'm speaking from my perspective as a professor in the Department of Rhetoric and Writing for our master's in professional and technical writing. And so I think with everything, it's always important to, check with your home department, check with your home program, check with the people who have been guiding you all along the way. But I have found in my experience that students often maybe worry about the portfolio a little bit more than they should, or have more anxiety about it than maybe they should. So I'm hoping tonight that I can clarify parts of the process and maybe relieve any anxiety that you are feeling. I cannot promise to relieve all anxiety, for I am not a magician, but I will do my best. So getting started, what I'm going to talk about is finding your audience and your purpose, thinking about your portfolio as something that has a specific audience, perhaps even multiple audiences, thinking about picking, okay, I'm assuming that your portfolios are going to be digital, that they're going to live online somewhere. So I think picking the web building platform, the website building platform is an important first step and not one that you want to take lightly. So I'll talk about some options there. Selecting your best work, you will have completed all kinds of projects of various types throughout your work toward your degree. And depending on what your program wants, and it looks like in the chat we have rhetoric and writing, applied communication, and biology, right? So those, your home programs might have different requirements about what needs to go into your portfolio, but at some point you will probably have to make some choices. And so I want to talk about how you might make those choices. I'll talk about how to organize that work. So a big part is choosing what goes in it, but then also choosing how you present it. So organizing everything, thinking about the elements that go into a portfolio and how you structure them. And since we are, I'm going to be talking about web-based portfolios, what we're really talking about is how to structure a website, right? So that's what I'll focus on there. And then I'll show some examples and talk about, highlight a few things in the examples that I think might be helpful to notice. And I'll say at this point, please stop me at any time if you can't hear me, if I'm not being clear, if I'm talking too fast, or if you just have a question. You can also type questions in the chat. I'll have it open here and I'll try to keep an eye on it. All right, so let's talk about finding your audience and purpose. I'm in the Department of Rhetoric and Writing. I'm a rhetorician. I study rhetoric, and one of the keys to rhetoric is thinking about all of your communication as having an audience, as working with an audience to communicate, and having a clear purpose that you want to accomplish with your communication and with your audience. So I think finding an audience and purpose for your portfolio is important. At the beginning, I'll say, and feel free to type questions in the chat if you have specific questions about this. But one of the first important things you're going to do in the portfolio process is you're going to need to put together a committee. And that usually, depending on the department, will consist of a chair. The chair is the person that you work most closely with usually, and then at least 2 other committee members. And those 2 other members are there to give feedback, to help you along the way, but your chair is usually the person that you work most closely with. So any advice that I give you tonight, remember, you're always going to want to talk to the chair of your portfolio committee and negotiate those things with them. You can tell them, well, Dr. Londie said this, but they get to be, you and your chair together are the boss of your portfolio. Okay, so make all decisions with your chair. Your chair's job is to make sure that your work is ready to present to the rest of your committee, and possibly to the rest of your program, your department. So that's like the ultimate thing that we're working toward. And when we think about the audience for your portfolio, it really there's one primary audience, and that is your committee, right? Your secondary audience might be something else. You might think of your secondary audience as being people in your professional world, people in a future career field that you want to go into, if you plan to use your portfolio as something that will help you get a job, right? Like a portfolio, a digital portfolio that you can share with other people. And so if that's a goal of yours, and it doesn't have to be, you can create your portfolio strictly for the purposes of getting your degree, right? But if you want it to serve another audience, it's important to think about that from the beginning. And there are a few things along the way that you'll need to think about if that's in fact a secondary kind of audience that you want. Your purpose, as I already kind of said, the ultimate purpose of your portfolio is to help you finish and earn your degree, which is wonderful and exciting. And it should be a good feeling, right? You might have a secondary purpose, not required, but you might, and that might be to help you get a job, to help you advertise yourself, to help you brand yourself. Those are some secondary purposes that you might think about, right? So this is an important first conversation for you to have with your chair. So don't skip that. Make sure you ask your chair questions about audience and purpose. All right, so let's get into talking about selecting a web platform. Here's where I have some things to share. I think there are three major things to think about when you're selecting a web building site. And the first thing is ease of use. You need to think about how comfortable you already are with the coding that can go into building a website, HTML and CSS. And you want to think about how much time you want to invest in learning a new technology. If you don't have any experience with HTML and CSS, or you have maybe minimal experience, you need to decide, how much time do I want to invest while I'm also trying to put my work together? How much time do I want to invest in learning those kinds of things? Because some web building platforms will require more of you in terms of coding, and some will require far less. But there is always a trade-off with that. And so that's what I'll talk about in a little bit. Something else to think about is accessibility and mobile options. Accessibility, when I say accessibility, I mean that the website can be enjoyed and used by all people, regardless of abilities and disabilities that they might bring. So if that's something that's very important to you, there are certain things that we need to think about. And I shared this presentation with everyone, but right here I have a link to a web accessibility document, and I'll just show it on the screen. This website offers a pretty good rundown for scoring the accessibility features of different web building platforms. So we have Squarespace, Wix, Weebly, Webflow, WordPress, and things. So I'll just share this as a resource that you can look at on your own, and I'll talk a bit about some of these things, but you just want to make a choice for yourself. How important is it to have a really accessible website? I would say it's very important, and most web building platforms are going to give you some important features that will help you do that. But if it's really important to you, you want to do a little bit of research on your own about that. Some students really want their websites, their portfolios to perform well on mobile devices. So tablets, smartphones, your refrigerator, whatever smart devices you have that you want to use to read your portfolio. And most web building platforms will let you see how your website will look on a mobile device. But I just want to flag that here as something that, if it's important to you, you want to be thinking about that as you're building things. And we'll talk more about that when we look at some specific web platforms. So Christine is asking, what does custom mean? How do we customize the accessibility? Oh, so are you talking about this website right here where I'm looking at? So right
Yes,
here,
ma'am.
okay, so right here, let's look at WordPress, for example. Okay, so some things that help with accessibility, like the ability to skip over navigation. Imagine you are engaging with a website only using a screen reader, like something is reading what's on the web page to you. It can get quite tedious and irritating to have like a long navigation bar at the top constantly being read to you as you go through different pages in the website. So one thing you can choose and program in is to skip navigation and reading. That's just like one example. WordPress allows you to do all of these things that are listed here, but it requires you to go into certain settings and play with things. It requires you to maybe do a little bit of coding, light coding on your own. So anywhere here on this web page where you see something where it says green and it's yes, it means that feature is there and it's pretty easily available for you to use and to implement. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. If other questions come up like that along the way, just write them down, put them in the chat. You can unmute and ask whatever's easiest. All right. So if you are on, if you don't feel quite as savvy at building a website, I think the most important thing for you to think about is just, will the web building platform that you select have all of the features that you need? And I think the two biggest things to think about are, what kinds of organizational or aesthetic features do you want your website to have? And what kinds of documents are you going to need to present? So if you're the kind of person who in your degree work, you've created like brochures and PowerPoint presentations and posters, and maybe you built a bot for something. I don't know. You made all these different kinds of things. You want to think about, will the web builder that I've selected accommodate the display of all of those things? If you're a person who in your degree work has really only, well, not only, but you've written essays, like text-based things, those are pretty easy to display on the screen on a website. So you just want to kind of take an inventory of, what are the kinds of documents I'm going to need to show, and will the web builder that I'm using be able to accommodate that? We can go into a little bit more detail with this. On this slide, I'm going to show you 6 options for web building sites that are relatively popular, and I'll talk about some of the pros and cons of them. And I have used or experimented with all of these except one, and that's the last one I'm going to talk about. So I'll say more there. The first one is Wix. And if you are using this presentation here, these links go to the sites. One of the great pros about Wix is that they have a lot of variety in the templates that you can select and use. They're fairly aesthetic, they're not going to be tacky or kind of, I don't know, cheap looking. They have some stuff that looks real nice. It'll have a lot of flash, right? It's going to dazzle people. Wix also, because of how it works, allows you to do more of the kind of flashy animation things that you might see on a website. So whenever you see a website where you have text and there's like a video playing in the background, or you get this kind of parallax scrolling effect that is a little trippy, any kind of animation, motion kind of stuff that you can see in a website, Wix will give you some limited options to implement that into your page, which if you're looking for that kind of nice stuff, that's good. Wix has a very drag and drop interface, and I'll say that a few times about some of these platforms. And when I say drag and drop interface, it just means that, if you want a title to be on the page, it's about, going to a tool menu, selecting it, dragging it to the page, and typing what you want in. It requires very minimal, practically zero if you want, coding knowledge. So if you don't know HTML or CSS, or you just don't want to do it, Wix can help you with that. Has pretty good accessibility features. I think it's on the higher end of, meeting all the marks for accessibility that are built in. So you don't even really need to know that you're doing them, right? If you don't know how to do it, it's going to do some things or prompt you to do some things automatically. So I think it's a good option. Christine in the chat says, do you suggest that we purchase a plan if we can afford to? I think that's a great question. And it gets to one of the cons for the Wix option. So all of the things I'm going to talk about, with the exception of one, have a free option. A free option and a paid option. The Wix free plan has some pretty prominent branding that you'd see on the website. Will it be like a little shadowy Wix label at some point? And if that bothers you, you can all of these platforms will give you the option to purchase a paid account that will give you a domain name. So it could be like ChristineJonesPortfolio.com or something like that. But it's not necessary. To create your portfolio, you do not have to pay, or you don't have to pay any money, right? It is perfectly acceptable to use one of these free versions and call it a day. The only point at which I would suggest that maybe you think about purchasing something is if you really intend to use this master's portfolio in the future as something related to your career, your profession, and you want it to be a little bit more precise, right? You want your own domain, you want your own space that's going to live with you for a long time. But if you're just doing it to fulfill the requirements of your degree, which is totally fine, you shouldn't have to pay for anything. But again, I would talk with your chair about that as well too. But I think that most chairs probably feel the same way. I will say a few times about platforms, this phrase non-transferable. And what I mean by that is, how easy would it be for you to build a portfolio on their site? And then if you want to take all of that web building work and put it somewhere else, like a different web building platform on your own personal website, how easy is it for you to do that? With Wix, it's not easy. So when you sign up for an account with Wix and you build your website there, it will be there and only there. If you want it to be on a different platform somewhere else, you'll have to rebuild it there. So that's something to think about. Okay, so Google Sites, I think, is a pretty straightforward kind of web building platform. I would recommend it for people who want to not code things. It will do a lot for you. But again, there's a trade-off, right? If a web building platform requires coding or makes a lot of coding available to you, it means you're going to have more control over things and you're going to have more options. The less control that it gives you over the code means the less control you have over what it looks like. And you kind of just have to make do with some of the choices they've already made for you and the templates that they provide. So it's just a give and take there. Google Sites is a drag and drop kind of interface. One of the positives of it is that it works well with things that are already in Google services like Google Drive. If you have all of your work already in Google Drive, putting it into a Google site is going to be relatively easy. Some of the cons, like I was saying, they have limited design features and templates and pretty basic accessibility features. But again, it's a good option. Weebly, I think, is right in the middle of Wix and Google Sites, where Wix requires a little more coding and is flashy, lots of templates and stuff. And Google Sites is a little limited. Weebly is kind of in a comfortable middle, I think. It's still got that drag and drop interface. It's got some good aesthetic qualities to it, some good, templates that are going to make you happy, I think. The free plan has a little bit of branding. It's somewhat transferable, so it's a little bit easier to move your work from Weebly like to Google Sites if you wanted to move back and forth. So I think it's a good middle of the road kind of option. I've used it quite a few times, and I was pretty happy with it. WordPress, variety of templates, great accessibility features. One thing that WordPress does that these other sites don't do, well, Google sites might do it. WordPress keeps a version history, which I have found helpful in the past. That's like let's say you're working on a page of your portfolio and you're building the website out and you make a change and you're working on it and you think, oh, I don't like that change. I want to go back to the way I had it before. You'll be able to do that a little bit more easily with WordPress because of the way their version history works. One of the cons, though, see, there's always a trade-off, right? One of the cons with WordPress is that it's really not as drag and drop as some of the other options. I have found that it always requires some HTML and CSS knowledge, even if it's minimal, to get something to work the way that you want it to, and to fine tune things. So if you have that knowledge and you aren't afraid of it at all, I think WordPress is a good option. I use it all the time for most of the websites that I have to build. Squarespace. It has everything you need, but there's no free version. Boo, that's terrible. So I just put it there because it's popular and I want you to know about it, but you really have to look at the pricing plans. You get good customer support for that. So if you're the kind of person who wants that kind of personal touch and you need to ask people questions, Squarespace is pretty good for that. So I won't say too much more about that one. The final one is called Webflow, and this is the one that I have not explored. It's relatively new, but it has good reviews, so I wanted to share it with you, and I would be interested in anyone who tests it out, to hear your feedback on it. If you look at the website I had shared here, they have pretty good ratings for accessibility. So I'll just, put a huge asterisk next to that one. I'm offering it as a suggestion, but I haven't used it personally, so I can't personally recommend it. But I think that from this table of 6 choices, Weebly is a good choice. Google Sites is a good choice. Lots of students have done their portfolios in Wix. In fact, I have some examples I'll show you later. As we go through, if you have more specific questions about these platforms, we can talk about them a little bit more. But let's start talking about how to select your best work. Again, you always want to think about your audience and purpose. As you're selecting your work, keep in mind who's going to be seeing this work and how you want them to use it. So what I mean by that most specifically has to do with, do you want to use the portfolio just for the degree, or do you want to use it for some other purpose, like some career purpose? If that's the case, then you want to select your work with an eye toward that, right? Which items in my, repertoire of work that I've created for the degree are really going to stand out to people that I want them to hire me, right? So what work is going to do that? But the next thing, and I would say the most important thing, because this is for your degree, right, is to think about program requirements. Now, in the Department of Rhetoric and Writing, we ask students to think about selecting their work with an eye toward our program learning outcomes. In other words, what are the 6, or I think we have 8 things that we want all of our students to have learned by the time they are finished with the program. And so we ask students, as you're picking out your work, think about which items you have created over the past few years that best illustrate or prove that you have met those learning outcomes. So this is where I would say definitely ask your chair if there are specific program requirements for the portfolio and what needs to go in it. Usually there's some kind of you have to demonstrate that you have learned a certain kind of thing, right? So that might help you make choices about what to put into your portfolio. When you are thinking about the kind of work that you want to include, and I think it's great, a first step is to look back, just go semester by semester and class by class, and just start with a piece of paper and make a list. In this class, I did these major projects, and go on. And that will give you an inventory of what you have. As you're looking at that inventory of all the things that you've made, think about which of those items are ready to go, the ones that you have worked the hardest on, that you have edited or revised the most. Those might make it to the top of your list in terms of what you're going to include. That doesn't mean you can't include things that you've made that are maybe a little rougher, but you want to leave time to give it the polish that it needs, right? Most students have to do a little bit of revising to some of the work that they put in their portfolio, and don't underestimate the amount of time that that can take. So as you're looking at the work you're going to include, think about that revision and editing time. Look at the pieces that are most polished, put those, toward the top. And if there's something that you made that you really, really loved, and it really captures what you're about, but it's maybe a little rougher, you can include it, but it will probably need a little bit of revision and editing. And then finally, this is kind of an optional thing, and I'll say more about it here in a bit. You can organize the work that you put into your portfolio based on what your specific program is looking for, right? So for example, I mentioned rhetoric and writing, wants students to think about including work that shows that they've met our learning outcomes. But you can organize your work a little bit differently within that, right? You can pick something else. And one way to do that is to find a focusing theme. So rather than presenting your portfolio as just kind of a collection of your work, you can find like an umbrella concept or overarching theme that all of your work falls under. And usually you can find that by thinking about what question or concept or big idea is central to, if not all, then most of your work. And I have in the examples I'm going to show, I have some portfolio examples where students organized their work in more of a thematic way. So hopefully, if that doesn't make sense to you right now, you'll get a better idea of what that might look like in a minute here. All right, so organizing your work. What do you do when you have all of this stuff, right? You did your inventory of what you have. You've found the pieces that you think are your strongest. You have some others that maybe are not your strongest, but you're going to revise them. How do you present them to your audience on your portfolio? I think that there are three major ways to think about it. One, you can present by program requirements. So this is going to emphasize your degree-based expertise, what you have learned specifically through your degree. You can choose a thematic organization. That's going to probably emphasize more of like your personal core values, things that are of most concern to you in your field, in your profession. And you can also think about media type. For some students, this is the more important thing to focus. What can you make? Specifically, what can you make for other people, right? This emphasizes things that you can make for yourself and for others. For example, if you want to harness everything you've learned in your degree and work as a freelance video editor for folks, you need to show that you can do that kind of work. And so organizing by media type might be more important there. So let's talk about what the portfolio might look like. We're going to talk about the elements that go onto the website. And this will be real quick, and then we'll look at some examples. So start thinking about questions that you want to ask. The basic structure is that, we're talking about a website here. So you'll have a home page, the first thing that the audience member sees, that the user sees. You can call that your introduction. You can call that your home page, whatever it might be. You usually have a tab or a section that's just all of the work for your portfolio. It might be a collapsing or hierarchical tab where, you click on it like you would, if this button said your work, you would click on it. And a menu would come down and you'd have further sections. You usually include some kind of CV or resume, depending on what's appropriate for your field or your discipline. And then sometimes students do like a little about or biography page, a brief biography page, not your life story, but like a little paragraph and a contact. And so in each of these sections, your first page, your introduction page, your home page, that's where you offer just a brief description of what the audience will find in the rest of your website. So it's like, welcome to my page. On this site, you can learn more about my work, you can read my CV, and you can find out more about me, something like that. If your program requires you in your portfolio to include a maybe more extended piece of reflective writing, a few paragraphs where you reflect on your journey through the program, where you highlight the things that you learned or the things that you learned that were most important to you, that kind of writing can usually go on your homepage, your introduction page. Again, it doesn't have to, but that's a thing we typically see. When you're presenting your work on the page, it's going to be organized into meaningful categories. I'll show you some of the ways that students have organized their work in their portfolios. One thing I think that students sometimes forget to do and have to sort of do at the last minute or be reminded about is that whenever you are presenting or showing something that you made on your portfolio, whether it's an essay, a PowerPoint presentation, a poster you made, whatever it is, you need to provide some context for that project, right? Your audience needs to know, what class did you make it for? What was the original assignment that led you to make this thing, right? So if it's an essay, what did the professor, what was the assignment? What were they asking you to do in that essay? What was the purpose of that project? And it's also good at that point to talk about, what you learned from it. Why this is a valuable sort of milestone in your work towards your degree. And if, I think it's also nice when you're giving context to your work to talk about, if you had to do it again, what would you do differently, right? That shows us that, it wasn't perfect the first time, or that you've learned things in the degree and you can apply those even to your own work. Now for the CV or the resume, just consider your audience. Do you think that people in your program, or if you're using this for more of a professional purpose, do you think that they want like a full accounting of all the things you've ever done, multiple pages, or do they want just like a one-page document? Either is fine for the degree requirements, but you might have another purpose in mind. And so just keep that in your thoughts and talk to your chair about it. And then finally, the about page is just usually to help personalize your portfolio so that it doesn't feel so impersonal, right? You're a human being and we want to see your humanity. So it's okay to talk a little bit about yourself on your portfolio. And the final about or contact page can be a good place to do that. All right, so let's look at some portfolio examples. In this slideshow, this link right here, well, I'll just go ahead and click on it. We have a page on the Rhetoric and Writing website where we post student portfolios. So this is a good resource for you to browse what folks have done. I've selected a few that we can look at that will help me talk about specific things. And so I'm just going to go through those real quick. So here we have one that uses Weebly. Right away, you can see it is powered by Weebly. So this is what I meant by branding. So this is the free version. This is from Harold Moses. I don't believe that he had a lot or any HTML coding experience, but he was able to put his portfolio together. He has his landing page with a welcome reflection piece there. There's a menu at the top, and you can see how he has organized his work. He has something telling about me, presenting the portfolio with his sections, editing, collaborating, and writing for business and government. He has his CV or his resume and a contact page. If you look at how he organized the bulk of his work, they show his emphasis in the program. He focused on editing, and so here he has details about each of the editing projects he wants to include. You can see right here, he has embedded a project of his that looks really nice, and you can kind of scroll through it to see something that he has made, and so on. He has more of those projects here. So I think that this is a pretty straightforward example of a basic portfolio that you can create. I'm just going to open a bunch of tabs here. Okay, so this one is from John Vickers. This is an example of a portfolio that's organized more thematically. If you look up to this link right here, he has selected, I think, approximately 10 or 11 pieces of work from his degree, so 10 or 11 separate projects, and he's organized them into these three categories: understanding pathos, emotion in theory and research, and pathos in practice. So pathos just means, thinking about emotion as a way that we connect with people and communicate with people. And what he did, and I worked with him on this portfolio, so I remember this process. What he did was, when he looked at all of the work that he made for his degree, he noticed a theme going through all of his projects, that he was always interested in emotion as a persuasive tool, a persuasive strategy. And so he wanted to highlight that thematically. So that's how he created his categories for how to, where he was going to put all of his work. And I'll just click on one of the pages, Understanding Pathos. So you can see each project has a little bit of writing attached to it for context. And then you can see the thing that he created there. All right, let's look at a couple more. So here we have one from Wix. This is a free version. So you can see at the top here where it says this site was designed with Wix.com. That's the branding that will be on your page. If you don't mind that, then it's fine. But this is also a good example of what I meant by the kind of flashier things that Wix will allow you to do. Do you see this like video effect that's happening in the background? Wix will let you do that. I don't believe any of the other web building platforms that I listed have that particular functionality. So that's important to think about. Also, you'll notice how this page scrolls. If we can click this button and it just moves us down, that little animation effect, how that little line popped up there. Those are the kinds of things that Wix can do. Things look a little bit fancier on Wix. But you can also see still you have the home, about, skills, resume, a separate link for just all of the things that go into the MA portfolio. And she has her work in three categories: writing, design, and HTML and CSS. So just from the portfolios we've looked at, you can see that all students are sort of creating boxes to put their work in, but the labels on those boxes are unique to each student, and they should be, at least from our program's perspective. They should reflect your particular area of focus and what you feel you've learned in the program. One of the strengths of organizing your website in this way, creating a homepage and about, whatever you're going to have, and putting your portfolio all in one tab, is that if you would decide to use your portfolio professionally and you don't want all of this your degree work here, you want other things, it's pretty easy to just delete this tab and then you just have a website that's just about you. So that's something to think about in the sort of beginning stages as you're planning your website. All right, let's look at a highly visual one with simplified navigation. This one is also created with Wix, the free version. This is from Lauren Snow, whose area of interest and creative emphasis was on video game design, video game narrative writing. So you can get that vibe from this, right? She's going to do something a little bit more playful and visual, and that's okay. I personally think that your portfolio should reflect you and your interests. So keep that in mind as you're going through. Let's look at a Google Sites version. This one is from Tori Watson. It still has, a navigation at the top. You can see she has a homepage, and then her three categories that she divided her work into were digital publishing, learning through pedagogy, and designing with purpose. She took a very storytelling approach to her portfolio. You can see as you scroll down here, her introductory page, she's telling a story. She has a metaphor about a fox that I found quite enjoyable to help frame the reference. And when you click on the individual pages, you can see that she really tries to write her way through presenting her work to her audience, right? She's going to tell you a story about each of the projects that she created. And I thought it was a very nice journey through her work. Let's see, the last one I want to show you. I put my boring site. Let me show you just a real boring site. This is a WordPress site. No pictures, just text. just links. I've got my scholarship, I've got my teaching, I've got some coalitional work, my digital skills, and my CV. You might not want anything to be visual. For my webpage, there were some specific reasons that I did not want it to have any pictures of myself or be visual. When I was out on the job market and I was trying to put myself out there, I didn't want people to develop maybe some preconceived ideas about who I was. I was a young woman at the time on the job market. I had a small child who had just come into the world, and I was feeling nervous about how people were going to perceive me. I think this is a concern for women. I think this is a concern for people of color. And that's not to say that that means you do or don't put pictures. It just means you make a conscious choice about it, right? Don't do it without thinking about it. I don't know if I would have made the same decision, if I went back in time to do it again, but I'm not sure. We'll think about it, but that's something to think about. All right, so from here, I think that's all that I have. We can look at more examples if you like, or I can just answer questions if you have them. I hope this was helpful. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening, y'all.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute.
Okay. No worries.
So the question I have is, and there's a reason for it. Do you suggest we do a CV or a resume, or can we do both?
I would say it depends on the kind of, so in our program, we're not going to ask you to make that choice based on any requirements of our program. I think we would ask you to make that choice based on what would be useful to you in your career after the degree. So for example, if you are going into a more academic field, you want to get a job at a university, you want to get a job as a researcher somewhere, you want to go on to maybe earn a PhD, the CV is what is expected. If you are looking to enter more of like the professional world, typically a very concise and precise resume is what is expected. So that's how I would make my choice.
Okay. And the reason I ask is because I've done some really significant work in my time as a GA for Chase. And I'd like to list that, as my professional experience, but at the same time, I also want to list everything that I've learned not everything, but what I've learned in the program.
If you're looking for a career more in the professional world and in the world of industry, something outside of academia, working in universities, I think a resume is a good choice, but that doesn't mean you can't put your academic experience on there. You just have to think creatively about how you present it, right? So for example, working with your graduate student association, right? That's a thing that lives in the world of academia, but there are skills involved in that work that could be applicable to a future career. So you have to frame it as that in that way. And that's the kind of thing, like, write that question down. Whoever you select to chair your portfolio, that's how you frame that question. I have this kind of experience. I want to include it on my resume. How can I frame that for people?
How do I? That's my favorite.
But I'm a firm believer in anything that you have done that is involves a skill that you think would be helpful to your future career, people you want to hire you. You just have to put it into their language, like translate it for them, so that they can see its value.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for your presentation. I feel like I've definitely learned a lot. I do have a question. I have a couple questions, or it might just be, I'll just try to word it in one way. So what would you recommend to someone who might have limited experience, and how can we make the most of the experience that we do have when we're making these portfolios to kind of really key into, like, I'm specifically looking to make a portfolio to find a job. And I'm running into this situation where I just feel like I don't have enough experience to say that I am adequately qualified. I don't know if that's like imposter syndrome or if that is something else along that line. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you for being here and listening, and also for your questions. And I think imposter syndrome is, okay, so I have tenure, and I looked at the portfolio that I made for my tenure case before I put this together, and just looking at it made me feel bad, even though like I already did it and it was successful. So imposter syndrome is not a joke. It's real. And I'm willing to bet that that's a big part of it. But if you feel like you don't have the kind of experience that will be desirable, I think it goes back to what I was saying to Christine as well. Like, let's say you have like one like really strong project. You're like, this is sort of the keystone of my work. I invested a lot. Then you make it the star of your portfolio. I think sometimes when you're looking at someone's work, whether it's looking at a student's work or, colleagues' portfolio, there can be too much. It's just like with resumes or CVs. When your resume or CV is in a stack with others, I think, the amount of time people usually take to look at it is less than a minute. There's only so much you can absorb. So a very clean, minimalist portfolio with just a few quality projects that you describe and sort of highlight your strengths in with like those context pieces. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Let me see here real quick. Let's look. So I want to show you a portfolio that is going to look it's going to look fancy. Maybe it'll be a little intimidating because this person had a lot of coding experience. But let's see. So each one of these blocks represents a project. It's 1, 2, 3, 6, 8 projects. Even if you just had these 3 right here on the screen, 6 projects. You display them in a way that they look nice on the screen, and each one gets its own time in the spotlight. And I think that even if you just had 3, like imagine this last row isn't here, 3 key projects, and all of the other things that go on the portfolio, your CV, a nice introduction, a clear sense of your purpose. Those are good things to have. I hope I am answering your question. Was there another part of your question that I didn't answer or talk about?
No, I think you got it. I think what I'm hearing is like, it's maybe not about having too much, but having like very specific, clear skills, and like find projects that are going to exemplify those skills, however kind of big or small. I think I'll disclose this. I've already completed my master's degree. I did that. I did it in 2020 at the end of the pandemic, actually beginning of the pandemic, I mean. And so I felt that I missed a lot of the opportunities to, I don't know, I guess work and get that experience. And I don't know if I transitioned well to the online environment. But like I've recently started teaching at UALR in the Department of Applied Communication. And so now I have this teaching experience, and I don't know how to put that into a portfolio, I guess, or how to make it like the star of the show, because I have my master's program or my master's defense, but I'm not sure if that particular project applies anymore to the maybe career field that I am potentially seeking.
Wait, so just to be clear, are you saying you now have some teaching experience and you want to put that in your portfolio, but you don't necessarily want to like pursue a teaching job? Is that what you're saying? Or no?
Honestly, if I'm going to be real honest, it's a little, I'm a little undecided.
That's okay. That's okay.
I'm stuck between wanting to pursue a doctoral degree and to pursue a professorship, but the idea of pursuing that seems unattainable at this time.
Mm.
So I'm keeping my options open,
Okay.
and I'm looking at potentially getting into the corporate environment, most specifically training and development and organizational development. And so trying to transition those skills. And I know like teaching is that, I just got to word it in like, I guess, like you mentioned, translating it into
Yes.
corporate language.
Yes. And so you can have a page on your portfolio where you know, it would be teaching experience, right? But maybe you call it, well, for one kind of job, I might call it community engagement, or you know, we put that word in there. If you want a team building experience, something, you know, facilitating groups, however you want to frame it. I think it can be helpful to actually look at job ads for the kinds of jobs you might like, and look at what the words that they are using, pick those words out and see how you can apply them to your own experience. You're going to do it the backwards way. But to me, what I'm hearing is that you have all this experience, lots of people would want you, and you have to figure out how you want to shine for them. And usually it comes down to, how can I let them know that I can do what I can make the things that they want, that they need. I can do these things for them that they need to have done. So I think that that's a good first step, is to look at, you know, what's your dream career, look at some ads for them, see how they describe the language around like skills that they need, and see how you can kind of reverse engineer that into your portfolio. That can be helpful. And if you want to get into a more advanced degree, if you want to get into a PhD, teaching experience is really valuable. Don't let them take advantage of you, but it can be really valuable. So you definitely want to highlight that, I think.
Thank you. I think that definitely answers my question.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? You can always email me after this. I didn't put my email on the screen, but it's just ltmartin@ualr.edu. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I'll stop sharing my screen. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Christine.
Sorry, just out of curiosity. Not out of curiosity, just really in the about section, would that be a good spot to maybe list my leadership positions and, or I guess leadership resume, or I don't know, like because you know, I'm chair of the Racial Barriers Committee, vice president of the GSA, and senator on the SGA, and all the other acronyms you could think of. But
I think I hear what you're saying. So I put on the screen right now, this is my mid-tenure review portfolio. So when I was going toward tenure, 3 years into it, they kind of check in on you and say, hey, are you still on track? And you say, yeah, here's evidence. Here's my portfolio. So in my teaching, so these categories are required by the university: your teaching, your scholarship, your service. But I wanted to show that in teaching, I had done more than just stand in a classroom. So in my teaching category, I have my teaching philosophy. I list advising there. So advising students, I count that as teaching, which is another way of saying, here's a thing I've done. I don't know where it goes, but I want to include it. So I'm going to call it teaching. And then professional development. And that's where I list like some leadership positions, workshops I've either facilitated or attended. And that might be a way to include some things for you. And you can kind of, you know, mess with that title a little bit, make it work for you, but some kind of professional development, professional leadership, leadership in education, educational leadership, however you want to frame it. I think the important thing is always, you know, when you're just listing things that you've done, always put, and I'm highlighting this, having no idea what I actually wrote or if it's good, but always put like a little introductory sentence, a couple sentences that tell the audience, this is why this is here. This is why I think it's important. This is why you should notice it. And we can talk more about this you know, at any other time, as you think about this and have ideas, you can always
Mhm.
email me questions.
All right, I just got really into taking notes and stuff, but thank you so much. It was a great presentation.
No problem. I'll stop sharing my screen now.